So we're going to jump right into the story of a war that did way more than just happen in some distant mountains. This is a conflict that actually helped bring down a superpower and completely redrew the world map.
So that's the big question, right? How could that even happen? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. We're going to connect the dots and see how this one conflict, over 10 long years, sends shockwaves around the entire planet and totally changed the direction of the 20th century.
Okay, so to really get why the Soviet Union would even invade in the first place, you have to zoom out and look at the bigger picture. And that picture was dominated by something called the Cold War.
Now, this wasn't a hot war where the US and the Soviets were directly shooting at each other. Nope, think of it more like a massive global chess match, a competition for power and influence. And Afghanistan, well, it suddenly became a really, really important square on that chessboard.
You know, for the Soviets, this was all about location, location, location. Afghanistan was their next-door neighbor. They absolutely had to have a friendly, stable government there. It was like having a strong fence in your backyard. It was seen as this crucial buffer to protect their soft underbelly from any Western influence.
So in 1978, a new pro-Soviet government takes over in Afghanistan, and they try to change, well, basically everything. And they do it way too fast. They brought in all these modern new laws about land and marriage, and for a lot of traditional religious Afghans, this was just too much, too soon. It sparked a massive rebellion across the country.
So now, from Moscow's perspective, things are getting messy. Their friendly government is losing its grip, and the country is spinning into chaos. They felt they had to do something, so they made a huge decision. It was time to send in the army.
And just like that, on Christmas Eve 1979, Soviet troops and tanks poured into the country. They took over the airport in Kabul and rolled down the main roads. It was a massive show of force. The plan seemed simple enough. Get in, put things back in order, and get out. Should be over in a few weeks, right? Well, they were about to find out just how wrong they were.
That quick win they were counting on, it just never happened. And one of the biggest reasons why wasn't another army, but the country itself. The terrain was absolutely brutal. Seriously, the landscape basically became a weapon for the defenders. Think about it. The Soviets had tanks and heavy machinery, but those are useless in towering mountain ranges with almost no paved roads. And then you've got these freezing winters and baking hot summers. For a modern army, it was a nightmare. But for the local fighters, they knew every cave, every ridge, every hidden path. The land was their greatest ally.
And this is where we meet the Afghan resistance fighters. They were known as the Mujahideen. But you've got to understand, this wasn't just another army.
So what does that mean? Well, the Mujahideen weren't one single organized group. They were made up of all these different local groups and tribes from across the country, but they all shared one very powerful goal: to defend their homeland and their faith from this foreign invasion.
And they fought using a tactic called guerrilla warfare. This isn't about big open battles. It's the complete opposite. It's about small, surprise attacks. They'd hit a Soviet supply truck, ambush a patrol, and then, poof, they'd vanish back into the mountains. It was a war of 1,000 cuts, designed to bleed the superpower dry, slowly but surely.
Right, so this fight in the Afghan mountains, it wasn't going to stay a local conflict for long. Pretty soon, it turned into a massive international issue, a key battleground in the Cold War. The whole world started paying attention and picking sides.
This is what we call a proxy war. The big powers, the US and the Soviet Union, don't fight each other head-on. Instead, they back opposing sides in someone else's war. And for the United States, this was a perfect opportunity. They saw a chance to give their biggest rival, the Soviet Union, a taste of its own medicine. Basically, their very own Vietnam.
And what that meant on the ground was a flood of cash and weapons. A lot of it came from the United States, but other countries chipped in too. This aid was crucial. It didn't just help the Mujahideen keep fighting, it allowed them to fight harder and turn up the heat on the Soviets in a big way. And sometimes, all it takes is one piece of technology to completely flip the script. In this case, it was the Stinger missile. Before the Stinger, Soviet helicopters pretty much owned the skies. They were terrifying. But this missile was portable, you could fire it from your shoulder, and it was deadly accurate against aircraft. Suddenly, those helicopters weren't so scary anymore. They were targets. This one weapon took away the Soviets' biggest advantage and totally changed the game.
So, by the middle of the 1980s, the war had ground to a halt. It was stuck in a brutal, expensive, and seemingly endless stalemate.
And this is what that stalemate looked like. Sure, the Soviets controlled the big cities. They could drive their tanks down the main highways.
at least during the day. But the Mujahideen, they controlled pretty much everything else, the countryside, the mountain passes, and most importantly, the hearts and minds of the people. The Soviets couldn't lose, but they had absolutely no way to win.
Back in Moscow, the leaders started calling the war the bleeding wound. And that's exactly what it was. It was just draining them. Billions of dollars they didn't have, thousands of soldiers' lives lost, all for nothing. It was killing their economy, their morale, and their reputation on the world stage.
Eventually, something had to give. A new leader, Mikhail Gorbachev, came to power in the Soviet Union. He took a hard look at the situation and decided, you know what? This isn't working. The cost is just too high. It was time to cut their losses and get out.
So the Soviets pulled out. The invasion was over. But the story doesn't end there. Not even close. The consequences of this war would echo for decades.
For the people of Afghanistan, the price was just unimaginable. We're talking about over 1 million civilians who lost their lives. Millions more had to flee their homes, becoming refugees. An entire generation grew up knowing nothing but war.
And the impact was huge for both sides. The war left Afghanistan in ruins, leading to a brutal civil war. But it also hammered the final nails into the coffin of the Soviet Union. The economic strain and the loss of prestige were just too much, and a couple of years later, the whole thing collapsed. The war created a power vacuum, a kind of instability that allowed even more radical groups to rise up later, a legacy the world is still grappling with. And that really brings us to a huge question. If a massive superpower with all its technology and might can't defeat local fighters who are deeply committed to their cause, what does that say about the limits of military power? It's something people are still trying to figure out today. And it shows why this war, fought so long ago, still matters so much.